That is so funny. I wish they could make it fun. Like, and now we're live.
I know.
We're recording in progress.
I know. I was in a meeting earlier, Zoom meeting earlier, and I'd started that. And it's like almost like a mood killer when it comes in with that really robotic, monotone voice.
It feels like you're doing something wrong, even though
yeah. You're like, wait, what?
It also gives you the first time for me, because when you are the leader or the host, like you don't get this like warning, like this meeting is being recorded. I'm like, do I need to be here now?
Oh yeah, it's like it's not a good feeling. So I'm just gonna click through. So just hang with me for a few momentos. I'm gonna say. Okay, and we are sharing to the group. Nathan, I know you stream to Facebook. And Carolina, have you considered doing that with your podcast as well?
I used to. That's how I used to do it for many, like the first 80 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like,
the first 80. You guys are such like just, I don't know, pros. I'm like such an infant here when it comes to podcasting.
Not at all. How many episodes have you done?
I'm honestly not even sure. I haven't counted.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, there you go, Frida.
And Carolina, how many have you done so far?
I recorded right now 158.
Awesome.
100. Okay, and Nathan? Like 400? No, you did was it 5 or no? What did you?
Yeah, we're at about 520 now.
It's like a full-on library of like content he has there.
It's a lot. But I honestly, and this is not feeding you a line, I truly still feel like a rookie because there's always something kind of new to learn and improve and refine. And so it's a learning experience, truly.
It's like everyone you meet and every experience you have, it changes you as a podcaster, as a person, interviewer. I mean, every time I get interviewed by someone, and you guys are like okay, but you know what? Now we're getting so into it. Let's just say hi to everyone. Hello, Facebook group.
Hello
Pepperverse. I'm hanging out with Nathan and Carolina. Nathan, of course, is the host of the Boca podcast and Carolina of the Tog Republic. And I'm so stoked to hang out with you guys. And if you're listening, you're hanging out with us. We want to, Kelsey said she also wore a black shirt, right?
Shout out, Kelsey. What's up?
Carolina will have to wear.
Underneath my sweater, I actually have a black tank top.
Perfect.
In the spirit of things. So if you guys are hanging out and watching, we'd love for you to ask questions, join in the conversation. If you're brave enough, you can come on live with us and chat because we like to see your face. You know, we like to engage. Think of it like a visual clubhouse.
I like that better, actually. I think that's good.
I used to love Clubhouse. Why you have to like mention such a good place that now is just like whatever?
Let's start there. Clubhouse was like a podcast, but like interactive. And it like exploded. It was huge. Were you guys both on it?
It was huge for 2 weeks and then it died. People, like, I remember having this conversation with people because they're like, oh, where is this going to go? How are we going to monetize this? I'm like, what are you even thinking about monetizing? This thing is going to die in 2 weeks. They're like, it's not. I'm like, I lived it through Periscope. It was hard for like a second and then it died.
So why is that?
Because I really love it.
I think it's an interesting conversation. I was just chatting with somebody about this yesterday, talking about how I have a lot of respect for, I think maybe even having the conversation with my daughter, who's 16, but has this kind of insight that I think is wonderful. She's very curious about what I'm doing, but nonetheless, Gary Vaynerchuk, I was saying how Gary Vaynerchuk has this wonderful perspective, which is don't be short-sighted and write off a new platform. And while I think that perspective is important, I've also been in the industry now for 20 years and I've seen so many different things come and go. And I realized that many, if not most of the kind of newest, most exciting, shiny things aren't likely going to stick. And I saw this mad rush because it was the thing to do to Clubhouse. And it seemed very telling almost immediately, you know, like, and I've made fun of this openly, so this is not like a secret, but all the Instagram reels with people dancing around and pointing to the captions and doing this kind of thing. I know it's the thing to do. And if you do it, wonderful. But I just see that as yet another trend that's going to come and go. And then we're going to look back at it in 6 months and be making fun of ourselves because it just really looks so ridiculous, especially people like my age that are on there doing that. I don't know. I just find it hilarious. I don't want to minimize the possibility of something sticking and ultimately playing a significant role in the marketing of our companies. But at the end of the day, just rushing to whatever the latest thing is so quickly and not actually committing to one or two or maybe even three platforms and showing up there consistently with intention, understanding how it drives business for you. I think we're missing out on opportunity and just being busy for the sake of being busy.
That's the recipe for burnout.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And what I was saying to this person was, Gary is glad to work 60, 80 hours a week. So being on 68 different platforms and of course, having a team to support him enables that kind of behavior. I don't want to work 60, 80 hours a week. So what I'm going to do is 20 or 80-20 principle, focus on the 20% that drives 80% of the results. And that just gives me more freedom and flexibility in the meantime.
Yeah. So Daniel Moyer is doing a big yes and exclamation mark. Thanks, man. Hey, so if you're watching right now, I want to know, are you podcasters as well? Like, do you have a podcast of your own, or are you interested in starting a podcast? I'm really curious because I think there's so much, if you have questions, I mean, these are the two people that you're going to want to ask. And what I find really interesting, like I've been on quite a few podcasts. I know Nathan, you've been on podcasts recently, and Carolina, I'm not have you been also being like on? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I have been also.
So like, yeah, that's right. Like full circle. And like, I've been on a lot and I really connected so much with both of you. And I love like both your positive energy. You're such a force in the industry. And like, you're so excited to give knowledge and like, you're so open also to listening to others. And I think that's that's a very unique type of podcast host. Like that's not the experience that I get. I don't know if you guys have had the same.
I have to say, genuinely, the Carolina, one of the strengths of Carolina as a podcast host, because I've been on her podcast as well, is that she actually listens. Mm-hmm. You listen to some podcasts, and I've had this experience being on a podcast or two in the past, where you get on and that host suddenly goes into a different mode, this almost kind of robotic tone of voice, and they're not truly paying attention, and they just kind of pop question after question after question robotically, almost like they're just following a script. Carolina actually listens and comes back with with critical thought, which leads to much better questions, follow-up questions. And I really appreciate that. I think it's something that we could take a cue from in life, just in general, in conversation with other people. Carolina does that really, really well. And I think that's part of the strength of her podcast.
Thank you, friends. I do love to talk and to have conversations. So for me, it's really important, even though for people that are, watching or listening, I do have, and you guys know, like I send you kind of like a list of questions that I would like to ask you. But for me, this is literally a conversation. So like, if you give me an answer that has an interesting point that I want to follow up, I'm just not going to jump to the next conversation for the sake of jumping to the next conversation. Like I want to dive deeper. And also, I don't know, like I really like this back and forth. So for me, that is important. Also for me, it's really important to understand and to read people's kind of like energy. So like if we're talking about a point and I hear that you're just like, this is it, I'm not going to push. Like I think it's really important when you're podcasting to not only come up with like good questions, but most importantly is, as you said, you need to listen to see how far can you go or when to like reel it in a little bit.
Because you guys have both been doing this for a number of years. You're seasoned podcasters. We've just talked about, before we went live, how many you've each recorded, which blows my mind. I'm like, we are the infants in this group, the Peppers here. And so like, what was your intention though when you started? Like, did you start because you're like, see, my intention was, I just want to hang out with cool people that are doing cool shit. And like, I want to talk to them. I just want to hang out. Like that was I had like no real focus. I'm just like, you're cool. I want to hang out on our podcast. But what was it for you guys?
Carolina, what was it for you?
For me, well, as I mentioned, I love to talk, and it would be really weird to be like, hey, I want to pick your brain. Nobody's going to talk to me if I send that email. Like if I see somebody doing something interesting and I send that email like, oh, I would like to know more, they'll be like, get out of here. But if I have a platform where we can, talk about what you're doing, and I can obviously ask you about yourself and promote you, and the side effect will be like the whole industry benefit from that conversation, why not? I had no idea I used to listen to podcasts about meditation. And in my mind, that was the only thing. I remember my husband coming home one day and I'm like, did you know there are podcasts about crime? He was like, where have you been? So like, I didn't know. So like, I was like, well, then if there's podcasts about crime, what happened with the podcast about like photography? And when I went looking for that, like, I don't remember, nothing stood out for me. I was like, this is not what I want. So I'm like, well, I'm going to create my own, but I knew nothing about it. I didn't know how to record a podcast. I remember literally Googling these things. And for I believe this helped me, because not knowing something helped me. It was like, I wasn't focused on like the actual outcome of like, am I going to get listeners? Who's going to tune in? For me, it was just like, I just want to have these really good conversations. So I believe like the first 20 of 30 episodes, I had no idea if people were actually listening to them, because I had no analytics, no nothing. And then of course, when I got my analytics, I was like, oh my God, this is actually somebody on the other side listening to this. But I believe having that like kind of like, I don't know if it's naive or like no knowing, helped me be comfortable, because I didn't have high expectations per se.
I think for me, aside from the genuine desire to connect, conversation's wonderful. And in fact, actually at the time, or at least early on in the podcast, I feel like there was, and maybe in still some ways is, kind of a hole in the industry where we don't really have, whereas the industry, or at least the modern wedding photography, portrait photography industry in years past, say 8-10 years ago, had leaders who really were kind of leading the industry in a direction. That kind of died off. And in some ways there's some positive to that, but what I saw was an opportunity to at least begin to lead conversation and to delve into some challenging topics that might kind of ruffle a few feathers. The podcast didn't necessarily go in that direction, but I still think there's an interesting opportunity there to lead the industry in a direction. And I try to do that at least with certain thought processes. But honestly, the biggest goal for me as a podcast host now is just value. And that seems almost cliche, but really at the end of the day, we only have so much time to give to any one piece of content, right? So if a photographer logs on to or turns on our podcast episode and listens for even 5 or 10 minutes, my goal is that they're able to walk away with something. And it's not that we're bringing earth-shattering brand new ideas. It's that we're focusing on key principles that, if actually implemented, will translate to positive results for these businesses. And that's really the key. And really, it's the key with any kind of content, right? We can consume endless books and audiobooks and podcasts and go to conferences and workshops. At the end of the day, if we don't actually apply, it doesn't matter. What I feel as though what I know we're bringing on the podcast, because we've gotten feedback from our listeners too, is actionable information. They can take and go do something with that. And that's really key. And I've actually narrowed down refined the questionnaire that I send to my guests ahead of time as well, with the emphasis at the very top in bold. The number one goal with this conversation is value. So make sure to take the time to come up with specific answers to the questions that I've outlined, so that we make sure that we give that. Because I've had too many experiences where I've had guests that come on and they're like, I just love to go with the flow and just kind of do whatever. And I cringe.
With Stacy.
Well, no, but it's what happens in that case is a lot of times it's a couple of things. One, photographers haven't, or my guests haven't taken the time to prepare in advance. So in the moment, I'm having to carry the conversation because they don't have answers to the questions that have a lot of depth to them or actionable information to them. So there's that piece. And most of the guests that I have on my show, I've intentionally done this differently than your kind of stereotypical photography podcast, where you see the same guests cycled through, kind of like the workshop circuit, right? The same photographers that are cycled through. And so you're always hearing from the same people. I have on basically anybody. If you can carry on a decent conversation and have something actionable to offer, I'm glad to have you on the podcast. But what that then puts on me is a challenge to make sure that the information, the content ultimately, and the experience of listening to this episode is enjoyable. And when you have guests on who aren't used to teaching or speaking and presenting ideas in a way that are easy to consume, it's on me as an interviewer to be a better interviewer. So I'm very, very clear now in managing expectations up front that, look, it's really important to have specific answers to the questions that I'm asking you. When we get into that conversation, I want to make sure that our listeners end up with actionable information. So value, again, as cliche as it might sound, value, true value, actionable value, not just big fluffy ideas, but valuable information that can be acted upon immediately. That's what's really important.
So what would you say? I'm going to do it from both sides. So the first side, I'm going to go to Carolina first. The first side is, as a podcast host, how do you select people that are on your podcast? And then as a person that's reaching out, what do you wish they knew when they were reaching out, wanting to be on your podcast?
I'm picky, you know, and when I think about somebody to be on my podcast, because of my personality and kind of like what Nathan was saying, like I want something that is actionable, right? Mm-hmm. Although I love philosophical conversations, for me, that's fluff. I need you to tell me 1, 2, 3. And that's also my personality. Like I am extremely structured. So like I need that on my podcast. So when I'm researching somebody that I perhaps see, right, I have like a list actually, like on my Instagram, I have saved people that are like possible podcast guests. I go and I take a look, like what drew me to them. Is that something that they can give me, obviously, a 1, 2, 3 steps to? Obviously, I can achieve the same level of success or whatever they're doing, but at least get my audience starting in the process, right? So let's say it's something about Instagram. Is this person going to tell me that Instagram is fantastic? Nah, 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 blah, or it's actually going to be like, this is what you need to do today to achieve this goal. If that passes that check mark, then I move forward with like, do I like this person? Am I going to have a good conversation? Or is somebody that I just think that is brilliant at what they do, but like won't be a fun person to interview? Because for me also, I need to enjoy this. Like if I'm going to go in and it's going to be like, lovely. I'm doing this for fun. So I want to have fun also. So that is my, my process. And in the past, when somebody has reached out to me, I actually have a whole episode about this. I receive about 10 emails per week about people wanting to be a guest on the podcast. The majority of them go straight into the garbage. The reason why is because, first of all, you're not even addressing me by my name. I don't care if what you have to tell is fantastic. If you're not even calling me by my name, we're not even going to do this because you're just sending an email to everybody. I don't want that. So that's my first thing. The second thing, again, if you are telling me about what do you want to talk about, and you send me an email that is freaking 5 pages long and tell me about all your achievements and all your success, and you're not getting to the point, I'm already annoyed. So we're not going to do this because now you're leading with like, right?
I'm so on board with her. Yeah, it's so good.
So I just want like, tell me like, hey, I love your podcast. Hey, Carolina, I listened to your episodes, whatever. This is what I want to talk about. And then you can give me all the fluff. So if I want to read it or not.
Can we need to record that and just like send it to people? Be like, our friend Carolina, if you want to be on our podcast, just watch this video.
100%. So like the majority of emails that I get, I don't even read them because I'm like, oh, not even my name. And 2, I don't care if you won best photographer in the universe, means nothing to me. Bye. That's my point. I don't know. Maybe I'm too rough for
no,
that.
it's very true. So the number of templated requests that we get, and they go, some of the people that are reaching out will take it a step further. I'll get, hey, I loved so-and-so recent episode where you talked about X. And you can tell just by the way that they've written that part out that they, maybe they went to the show notes and copied and pasted a line from the show notes or something like that, but that they didn't actually take the time to like truly listen. They don't really listen to the podcast. And yeah, really, it comes off really, really poorly when you can tell they're just copying and pasting or sending a template. And I'll add to that, when I get an assistant writing for the person that they want to come on the show, and I'm not actually getting to engage individually with the person who's actually going to be on the show, I have a hard time with that as well, because
unless your assistant's Kelsey and she's amazing.
it's wonderful to a point, but I'll also push back, because if I'm going to interview this individual person, I want to actually know what's motivating them to be on the show. If kind of to what Carolina was saying, if we're just getting a blanket request and I just happen to be on the list, it's super impersonal. And the conversations that I have with my guests are very personal. And the times where I've accepted, at least 1 or 2 instances anyway, where I've accepted that type of request, it was so cold an interaction, because there's no personal investment on that other person, emotionally in particular. There's no personal investment on the part of that guest. They didn't even interact with me leading up to the show. So now we come on the show and it's just this kind of like, oh, hey, I'm Nate. What's your name? And
strange person I've never interacted. That definitely makes sense. You've never interacted before. I have so many follow-up questions. I just want to go to Daniel here because he took the time to write us.
By the way, Daniel, I had him on my podcast. He was really good and fun to have.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. I think this is the one that we were talking with on Instagram, right? So he says, I have 2 podcasts, one that's co-hosted that we've been doing for 5 years, and it's for couples, Put a Ring on It podcast. Oh, this is the one, I think it's like a bit like an unconventional. I feel like there's something with that. I looked at that one. That one is relatively successful. So that's awesome. The one I just started, the Focus Photographers podcast, is still a baby. What advice do you guys have for just starting out? Focus on numbers, focus on just showing up.
Show up. That's it. The numbers are secondary. I mean, at some point you're going to have to start thinking, it's this actually people listening or not. But like in the beginning, as I said, I recorded 30 episodes and I had no idea, even if my mom was listening to them. She probably wasn't. She was like, I don't know what you're talking about. But like, for me, it was just like the fun. I'm like, I want to connect with this person. I want to learn something. I want to, maybe add to one person. If one person is listening, I'm fine. And then once you get past that, then you kind of start thinking about your analytics and all that, but just have fun.
That's a good place to start. It's less intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's surprising I guess we're still kind of at the infancy of podcasting, but the lack of analytics or lack of detail in the analytics is still, it's really surprising to me.
Yes.
So yeah, showing up is important. Consistency. I had attempted a different podcast years ago and kind of only went in half baked. And speaking of Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary really pushed me as much as I don't, I'm not 100% on board with everything that Gary says. One of the things that continues to push me is his consistency. And I said, you know what, it's time to up the ante and really truly commit. And so that was a number of years ago. And it's consistency that has led to the volume of content that we've been able to push out. And consistency, when we talk about marketing a podcast, for example, consistency in content and pushing out content is extremely important. I think that's really great. But then the other thing that I would throw out there is podcasts are now a dime a dozen. There are over 1 million of them. I think the last number I heard in the last month or so is like 1.1 million podcasts out there. So, and there are a lot of photography podcasts as well. If you're going to come out with something, like any business, really, be clear about how you're going to be different than any of the other podcasts. Just starting another photography podcast and differentiating yourself with a cute name isn't really differentiating yourself. And by the way, that cute name really gives me little to no indication what specific value your podcast is going to offer. If I were to do it over now, I would likely give my photography podcast a name that reflected the specific kind of content that I would be offering. Back when we started, there weren't as many photography podcasts. I was getting into a space that was relatively new, at least for the photography industry. This was 5 years ago. But now I might be more specific. So kind of focus on a niche area of the industry. And then photographers will begin to know, if I want information about whatever, fill in the blank, I go to so-and-so podcast for that.
Mm-hmm. When I think of both of yours, I think of business and marketing and having a successful business. That's definitely what I think of when I think of both of yours.
But if I could push back on that, Stacey, like just as an example. So I could say, hey, Boca Podcast is about building a successful business. That is such a wide ranging topic, because under that, there's like 68,000 different topics that we could get into that lead to having a successful business, big picture, right? So what does that actually mean? And that's where I would say, and photographers, this is something that is kind of a weakness in the industry in general. Photographers start a business and they say, I'm a wedding photographer, but they don't give me anything more than that. So I don't know why I want to book you versus the 20 other wedding photographers in my market. Same thing with podcasting. Rather than being super general about it at this stage, because there are so many podcasts, you got to niche down. You got to get really, really specific with the value proposition.
So I have like a couple different follow-up questions for this. So I would say, if you're going to niche down on something, pick something you either really know something about or you're very curious about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to be an expert because you want to be speaking maybe to the experts.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't just pick something you're like, this is hot and cool and trendy, and I'm going to go for this. And I feel like it won't come across with the same energy, the same excitement. Like the questions you're going to be asking, you'd be like, what? Like if you ask questions because you're actually curious, you're going to be asking for your audience, like what they want you to be asking. And then I would say also, you can have iterations of what you're doing. So even if you say like, I'm going to talk about this particular type of marketing, and it's some reason it's not going well, and you've been putting time, you've been consistent, you're like, Nathan, Carolina, I listened to you, I've been consistent, I've been putting out content, and it's still not working for me. Like, just what's the iteration, like the next one of that? Like, you don't have to start from scratch, but how do you take what you've learned and like where you are finding momentum or you're feeling your groove, and you can still evolve that. You don't have to stay in the same place to be consistent.
That's very true. With a brand position, we did this with my editing company. We started with a particular position because of where the market was and what our competitors were doing at the time. And about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, we changed our brand position because the way the market was shifting and because our primary competition was kind of following suit. We didn't want to do the thing that, as you were saying, was trendy in the moment and just kind of follow suit and look like everybody else. That's a natural opportunity to then position ourselves against that. So we offer something in contrast to that. And so, yeah, it's super important. You make great points. So
Carolina, this is a question I'd love to ask you, because you talk about marketing, and I know you talk about all different aspects of marketing. So do you feel like, and I love this because I would love for us to have differences of opinion, because then I want to hear like all the different sides. So I'm kind of like digging for that, but you don't have to do that if you don't want. But I feel like if I were to have a podcast, let's say like yours, that I'm so niche in a particular type of marketing, are there only so many conversations I can have about that particular niche of marketing? Or like, I'm talking about, you know what I mean?
I do agree on that. And I do believe like for your business, you're supposed to niche down. I think for podcasts, because it's a conversation, let's say my own podcast, right? It's about marketing. And we talk about all kinds of different marketing strategies. And I like it that way. I think that the mistake that I see with other podcasts out there is lack of consistency. Or as you said, they get on the loop that is the same. So like, even though I'm talking about marketing, I don't want just to be like, I'm only going to focus on like, let's say social media marketing, right? Because then, as you said, there is a point where like, how many times can I talk about Instagram? Like, I can't keep doing this for 150 episodes. So for me and my personal point of view, I do believe that you do need to have a selling point, right? But I don't believe that you need to be as niche as just to like super like niche on it. I think that you can allow yourself to like expand, and you can allow yourself, as you also said, try new things, right? Try new conversations, and then you'll see like, well, this conversation really, resonated with my audience. Then how I can, either bring more of this, or maybe I need to pivot a little bit here. Maybe I'm just super focused on this type of episodes or content, and I think it was going to be great, but my audience is not receiving this the way that I want to. So I have to pivot this. When I started my podcast, because I have some episodes in Spanish, right? I'm fluent in Spanish. All of you can tell here by my accent. So I started looking about like what's missing in South America, and there is no podcast in Spanish for like photographers. So I was like, okay, there's a huge marketing here. Now, the industry down there is completely different as it is in the United States, right? I'm not going to say that it's not as savvy, but like they're more focused on like art based and not based on marketing. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to start a new episode about marketing, it's going to be really well received, but it might not be what they need right now. So like my first Spanish episodes were about art and how to be a better photographer. And now I'm introducing like, well, you have all these beautiful pictures. Now what we're going to do with that? So like I have to give them a little bit of what they are used to like introduce a new topic.
Oh, and like knowing your audience, knowing your market. So I have something fun I kind of want to try. And Daniel, if you're still around, you're up for it. I would love for you to think of a single question that you really want to ask Nathan and Carolina, and I'm inviting you to come live and they will answer that question. So like a little case study, a little like mini mentorship. So think about your question. Let me know in the comments if you're game, and I'll drop the link for you.
I will say that Daniel has twin babies. So I don't know if he can come live. I'm just like speaking for himself. I don't know, but
maybe. And I hear you're on the beach with your family. I mean, you could show us the beach, show us the ocean. I mean, I'm in British Columbia, and it's been just like forest fires all around us. Three kids. He's a rock star. You are a rock. You have 3 kids and you have 2 podcasts, probably other businesses, because I can just tell you're like that kind of entrepreneur, which I love. But man, yeah.
Stacey, can I piggyback on what Carolina was saying? Because she actually makes an interesting point. And I want to clarify what I was saying too. When we talk about niching down, the last thing that you want to do with any business model is to niche down so far that you don't have a market. And I talk about this to photographers when it comes to brand position specifically. If you pick up, if I say that I'm a black and white wedding photographer for Chattanooga skateboarders, that's niching down so far that I'm probably gonna have like 2 people to choose from. And now I don't have a business. So you can't niche down so far that it limits you to the extent that in the case of podcasts, you don't have the content to offer. But as Carolina was talking, I pulled up her podcast. It's the Tog Republic podcast, and the subtext is wonderful. It's marketing ideas to help your photography business grow. Yeah. That's specific enough that we know that we're coming to a marketing podcasts, but it gives Carolina the world of marketing to play in, and she can go so many different directions there. Our tagline, or our position statement, if you will, is helping photographers build sustainable businesses. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? It means being not just building a business, hustling to build a business, but building a business that can sustain over the long run. And part of that is not burning out, right? We talk a lot about time management on the podcast. In fact, the first podcast I ever did was called I Have a Life. And the whole thought process was, let's talk about creating a business that enables us to still have a life while running a business. It was too nerdy, too geeky. It didn't play out for multiple reasons. But in this case, we're talking about building sustainable businesses. So that can enable so many different directions of conversation. But the theme is broad enough that we can go different directions, but it's specific enough that when they come to our podcast, they know what it is that they're going to be getting.
I love this, and I like to piggyback on this because just recently I have to decline a guest that I thought the topic that this person was pitching was beautiful, but I'm like, I can't understand how I'm going to turn this into marketing, right? And I have spoken a lot, like in my website, in my episodes, about like even on the episode that we did, Nathan, we talk about meditation and all that, but I was able to like talk about meditation and how we're going to bring this into like calm our mind so we can create better marketing. But this, this topic that this person was presenting to me, like, I was like, I really would love to have this conversation, but if I were to present this to my audience now, they're going to be like, what the heck are we doing here?
Interesting.
So I had to be like, listen, I admire you. Hopefully in the future, maybe let me think about how I can, bring this together. But like right now, I feel like I will be doing a disservice to my audience that I have built and I have put a lot of effort into this, bringing this conversation that they are not probably ready to receive.
That's
in
good.
The same token, once I had this person that pitched a fantastic idea, and I went and I kind of like check out all their social media and all that. And I was like, this is going to be great. I sent the questions. I started the interview, and you can't really tell from the beginning, the first 5 minutes, when you're like, this is the Titanic and I'm no Rose. I am dying here. And there was no way for me to bring it back. And it was actually so bad that this person, like, when we wrap it up, this person asked me, and I had to be like, I think that one of my things is like, I'm super honest. Like it is what it is. And I have to lead with honesty. And I was like, I am extremely sorry. I appreciate your time. I love the conversation, but I cannot publish this. This was not
good for you.
What we come here for. And is it a burn bridge? I don't know, but like at the same time, I cannot put something that is not going to be the quality that my audience now is expecting, just because it's a big name, or just because you're like, well, now we did it, now I have to publish it. That's what I actually stopped doing the lives, because I'm like, if something goes south, I want to make sure that I can control this.
Yeah.
And it only happened once, but I feel also like as a host, you need to be able to carry on with the conversation and then be able to be like, it was lovely, but thank you for this one-on-one, but I can't present this. I have to reach out after my audience, right? So it's not an ego thing. It's not like it's an obligation that I have. My obligation is with my audience to present quality content that they are excited about.
And it's good for the other person to get that feedback, because how are they ever going to be better? How are they going to know? Like, correct. I think in the right approach, and I'm sure, but I know you've nailed it, like how you approach them.
Yeah, you have to be polite, but you have to be honest, right? Yeah. I can be like, yeah, this was great, I'm going to publish this. And then send an email like, oh my God, my computer crashed. I don't know what happened. I mean, that was an option. It is an option if you don't feel like being like confrontational, but like, you have to be able to be honest and also be polite and be able to say like, I thought it was going to be great and I really appreciate your time, but like, I don't think this is going to fit with what I have going on.
I have actually so many questions. Okay, so I do think like if on the approach, if you give them that feedback, I think they're going to appreciate that. They're no matter what, even if they're upset, they're going to respect you, right? I think it's a very.
I hope so.
But you said the word confrontation, and I have this very interesting relationship with this word. And I feel like also as a podcast host, like asking questions, like asking for clarification, like Nathan, I love how you say, I'm going to give you a little pushback on that, or like, like I just find it so fascinating. I think especially as a female and the way I was raised, the word confrontation sounds so aggressive and sounds so negative. So as a host, when you're wanting to when you want to dig more and you're like, this person's not giving me something, or they're just surface stuff, and I want to confront them about a question. Maybe is that the word that you feel or think, or like, I just want to know your approach when you're going to dig deeper, ask for clarification. And like, do you feel aggressive, or do you feel like, I don't know. If
you ask with a smile, it's always nice. Like, tell me more. Hold on a second. I want to know. And I even remember when I went, Nathan interviewed me, I remember like before we started, he was like, okay, give me like the main thing. And I was like, I think you asked for 3 things and I have like 2 really clear. And I'm like, I will come up with the 3rd one. And you're like, no, we're not going to do that. You're going to come up with it right now. So I think, it's okay, right? You are leading the conversation. And so long as you're smiling,
you don't offend anyone. You don't like, am I going to put this person in such an awkward position that they're going to be like, what the WTF, Stacey, or like whoever. And like, I'm out of here. Like, you totally just made me look like a jerk because you were like questioning me. Have you ever had that experience, or like how do you navigate that?
I think tone, to Carolina's point, it's about tone. I mean, and I've learned this the hard way, unfortunately, in personal relationships, because I tend to be pretty direct at times, but yeah, it's setting the right tone literally from the get-go. If they log on and they see my face and I'm smiling and I'm setting a warm, comfortable space to hang out in, then to push back exactly the way that I just did a couple of minutes ago, Stacey, to say that I'm going to push back and just ask them a follow-up question. It's not a big deal. I did actually have one guest whose episode went so poorly. I think I actually followed up with them afterwards and explained why I felt it went poorly. And this was before we started doing the live episodes. And I just said, hey, look, it didn't go very well. And this is what we're trying to achieve. What if we approach it this way? We could refine it, improve it, and come back and do another episode. Would you be interested in that? And we actually did another episode. Amazing. So I wouldn't want to do that on an ongoing basis. And part of that is now on me, especially doing every single episode is live now, that we need to do a bit of research ahead of time, have had some conversation to understand what it is that we're getting into before we go live. And that's on myself and my producer to make sure that we cover the bases in that way. But otherwise, yeah, set the right tone and help them feel comfortable, and pushing back a little bit shouldn't be that big of a deal.
I love when it happens. Actually, I enjoy it so much.
I also feel like if you're interviewing something that it's a topic that you already know, that you have like a lot of questions or pushback, that you let them know in advance. Like I just recently interviewed Esteban Gill. It was fantastic. We're talking about like creating a slideshows the same day of the wedding. That for me, that sounds like my worst nightmare. So I was like, listen, I want to have you on the podcast because I think it's really interesting. Mm-hmm. Do I love this topic? No. Do I have a lot of questions? Yes. Are you okay with me challenging you a little bit? And he was like, yes, bring it. Mm-hmm. So he was prepared, and obviously you do it in a polite manner. But I don't want to just have somebody on the podcast and be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I do. And for me, if I don't feel like I know enough not to ask the questions, because I want to be on the shoes of my listeners. Like, why you didn't ask that? Like, now we want to know.
Yes. Oh, okay. So I'm just going to go to the comments here, or I have more questions. Adina wants to know, do you think it's important for a photographer to have a podcast or to be on one? So I think is that like every photographer? I'm wondering, Adina. It's honestly not something I have thought of doing. So I'm more just curious than anything. So I think a good question would be why a photographer might start a podcast and what is the purpose of that? And then why a photographer should be on a podcast and the intention behind it maybe. And why are they doing it? Why should they be doing it? And maybe how that might help their business if the intention is correct. Maybe we can talk a little bit around that. And Daniel said that he's just taking notes from you guys. I don't think he's coming on live. Dude, if you change your mind, let us know. We'd love to have you. And he says, Carolina and I totally didn't agree everything I talked about on my episode. That's fun.
It was really
really
fun
want
because this episode he was talking about like interviewing, your clients prior, to booking them, like having that like discovery call. And he was saying that he is all about like asking personal questions and wanting to know like kind of like more about like them as people. For me, and then I explained that in the podcast, culturally, Colombians, it is a big no-no to like ask personal questions. That is like, we're not gonna go there. So for me, since I am a very pragmatic person, like my questions are very kind of like direct, like logistics about weddings. So it was actually great because now within that episode, we gave like 2 different approaches to have a successful like discovery call with people.
Cool. Well, Daniel, I threw you the link. He's just gonna ask, he said he'll pop on here for a second to ask a question, which is fun. This is what I love.
And I'll answer. Oh, is he coming on now? Oh, he is. Here he comes.
And then we'll go back to Adina's question.
Adina, yeah.
Yeah, because it's a good one. Whoop, whoop. Welcome.
Where's Daniel?
Welcome. Show us the beach.
Do I look tan? I look good?
You look tan. You look like summer.
Thank you. Do I look tan? Yeah, I feel like it's very yellow in here.
Mine's like hot pink all of a sudden. So
oh, this is weird.
Oh, you're getting. Make sure you mute the Facebook group.
Oh wait, I just got it. Hold on.
That's really fun.
There we go. Okay, sorry. I'm just fascinated by listening to you guys. So I'm not anything special. I'm just very excited to hop on here. Carolina, I love your podcast. And Nathan, I actually filled out your form a little bit ago, and your assistant got back to me, so I filled out the form to be on your podcast in a little bit. I'm very excited about that.
Awesome.
But my question is actually, so I do have another podcast. My co-host is very type A. She takes care of all of really the other stuff, right? We call her the brains and I'm the heart of our podcast. But the one I'm doing now is all me. And so you guys seem like you both have a really great handle on, like, the podcast is not necessarily the pinnacle of everything. Like, you get the episode out, then what, right? Like, you have to get people to go to it. So I guess that's what I'm interested in, is like, you talked a little bit about kind of the before. What about the after? That's what I'm struggling with now, I think.
Great question.
You want to go first?
Go for it.
No, you go first.
Oh, so I think.
Are you guys Canadian? That feels like a great Canadian moment. Go ahead.
One has just been consistency. I kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, just consistency in putting content out, because there are a number of photography podcasts that have started up over the years and they put a little bit of content out and they just fall off. The fact that we are consistently putting content out kind of bumps us to the top a little bit, if you will, literally and figuratively. So that's one thing. Just be super consistent and commit to X number of episodes a week, whether it's 1 or 2 or however many, and do that consistently. That's number 1. 2, and this is honestly still a challenge for us. And I think we need to come up with a little bit better way to engage with our guests to enable this, but asking for, and then encouraging and ultimately enabling, and that's really key, the guests to share about the episode. And we do occasionally have on guests that have big followings. It's not normally the case, but occasionally we do. And in many cases, even in those situations, those guests haven't readily or actively shared about us. And we produce graphics for them. We give them copy that they can post with. We make it pretty easy, I think, but there's still not a willingness to do so. So that has helped to a point for sure, especially when some of those with a bigger following have shared. But that would be the thing. And again, I would highly emphasize enable them, because I've had people send me that I've been on their podcast, send me their, just said, hey, can you share? Or maybe they sent a graphic, but didn't really give me an idea of what would best add value to that process in sharing about the podcast, or giving some kind of directive. There was no really, it was just like, hey, can you talk about us? Or hope you'll share. So enabling them, making it as easy as possible, so there's minimal barrier to that so-called entry to get that done. That would be really, really key. The other thing that we've done over time, we're not doing it right now, and so far it hasn't really hurt us, but we have boosted posts about the podcast on social media. We paid for just a little bit of boosted posts. And by the way, and this is a loaded topic in and of itself, I don't normally recommend boosted posts as a form of advertising, as effective advertising on Facebook, but it's something that we have done just to get a little bit of extra exposure out to the photography community about the podcast. And that's been a kind of a third realm or a line of approach that we've taken.
Cool. Okay.
I ask all my guests, right? They're coming here to my podcast to share knowledge and all that, but the majority of people that I'm interviewing, they have something to promote. So when people have kind of stake in the game, it's easier for them to promote. So even though the podcast is not about their services per se, at the end of the podcast, I'm like, hey, I've heard you have a beautiful class about whatever, painting or whatever the case is. Do you want to talk about it? And once they have that, for me, in my case, it has been easier to have people talk about the podcast without, I do send, all of you have been on my podcast. So I do send kind of a follow-up, which also interesting. Out of all the podcasts that I have been on, I think only Nathan, I think that has sent me an email. There's podcasts that I'm like, hey, did it ever air? They're like, oh my God, we published that 2 months ago. I'm like, it would have been nice for you to tell me. So I could help you promote it. So it is really important that you actually send an email hey, the podcast is live today. We'd love for you to share it. But I feel when people have something for them to also sell, it's easier for them to push the podcast naturally. But at the end of the day, just with our own clients, we can only lead them to the water. It's not their job to do the marketing for us. So
yeah.
Interesting.
Those are such great points. We only have Nathan for 4 more minutes. So Daniel, you just hang out with us. Just chill if you want. We'd love to have you here. So we're going to answer Adina's question in 4 minutes. So
hey, Stacey, I just messaged my 2:00 meeting. We've got a little bit of extra time, so we can push it a little past the 4 minutes.
Okay. Because then Daniel, I'd love to even get your point of view on this, because you have a successful podcast and you started your fresh one, the Focus Photographer. That's correct.
The other one is for couples, it's couple facing. So that one's got 100+ episodes,
Amazing.
1 million downloads or something like that. But it's not I don't know what metrics are, but so Danielle does all that. But that one's couple facing. And Nathan, you made a really great point before about not just putting a podcast out there for photographers for the sake of putting it out there. And I didn't want to until I had an idea of something that I thought was a little bit fresher. And a different way of putting it out there. So that's what ultimately made me start it. But you guys are the trailblazers, so I'm following in your footsteps.
You guys are the trailblazers. Daniel, then I have a follow-up question for you, my friend. I'm curious. How do you separate yourself? How do you define your podcast, your photography podcast?
So if you guys have ever been to workshops and seminars and conferences and stuff, they're always super inspirational and you get stuff out of them. But my favorite part and what I've always learned the most about, I've been full-time for a little bit over 12 years. And my favorite parts is when you're out at night and maybe you're having some drinks or having some dinner with a bunch of photographers and everybody's talking about how they do business, right? And nobody's worried about sharing anything or keeping secrets. Everybody's just talking shop and sharing. And I love that interactive approach, right? So maybe say marketing comes up. And somebody's gonna be like, oh, well, I do Instagram marketing. That's where I get all my leads from there. Somebody else is gonna say, oh, I'm all about Facebook. Somebody else is gonna say SEO is where you gotta put your time and energy. Another person is gonna say word of mouth, right? That's where you gotta put your time and energy. And I love all those different perspectives to this one topic. So I formatted my podcast that every month has a topic. And I invite photographers on or people who have a different approach to that given topic. So say it's marketing, say it's I'm doing one on mindset. I'm recording one for just newbie photographers, another one for IPS, just a different topic. So it's a lot of work on the front end. I've got 30 episodes recorded while I'm waiting to fill the rest of the month. But it's sort of like a mini deep dive into something for a monthly topic.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm definitely going to check that out.
It's very new.
I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
So Nathan, I know you're itching to answer this Adina question. I can see it. You're like, okay, I'm ready. Go for it.
Yeah, this is something that we talk quite a bit about on the podcast, actually, is the idea of a big picture view. So as a wedding photographer, I started back in 2001. When I got into photography, I did it because I thought the fancy camera, the expensive camera was cool. It was ridiculous. The motivation, and I don't judge myself for that, but just in hindsight, I know that getting into business with that type of motivation or lack of motivation, just on a whim, really, is not really going to help me set up a business model that is sustainable. Now, fortunately, I got lucky. It worked out for me. But all that to say, if we go into a business, or in this case, an effort at developing a podcast, that business model, or in this case, the podcast, needs to be a reflection of our bigger picture goals. What is it that we're trying to accomplish in life as a human being? I know that's a loaded topic, but then let the values and your financial goals and your time goals then trickle down to the business model you create or the podcast that you're creating. So in my case, I have not only an editing company, but I also have other brands as well. So creating a podcast, which enabled me a platform to, first of all, connect with photographers, secondly, add value to their lives and business, also then gave me a platform to soft sell those brands. And it is such a tiny, it's probably like 3%, 5%, if that, of the podcast that we ever even talk about the brands. Because the last thing that I want is to force this down people's throat and they feel like they're always getting a commercial every time they log on. But it does give me an opportunity. And we've seen over time, the percentage of new accounts that we're getting at Photographers Edit steadily rise. And that's been a really interesting opportunity. So I would just say, make sure that you're clear about what it is that you're trying to accomplish as an individual and as a result, as a business person. And then ask the question, does this podcast enable those goals? If not, don't worry about it. Be a guest occasionally for the fun of it. They're great fun to be on, but don't go to the extent of starting that podcast if it doesn't support what you're trying to achieve.
Because then you're going to have the problem that you have 2 episodes and you're like, I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. If there's not an underlying motivation that is tied to kind of bigger, deeper seated goals and aspirations, then yeah, it's going to be so easy to give up after a few episodes or not to show up consistently. I have much bigger underlying goals and then the value set that's driving what it is that I'm doing at this point. And the cool thing is it's a relevant effort, regardless of what business in the photography industry that I'm a part of. And so that's kind of cool too.
What about, should you go on a podcast? So Carolina, are you still shooting full time as well? You're amazing. Okay. So then from a photographer's point of view, like, why should photographers be on podcasts? Like, does it benefit them? Like, what are some things that you would say, like, hey, if you're thinking about it, this?
What do you have to say that is so important for the people to hear what you have to say?
Mm-hmm.
Whether is, if you're a photographer and you want to talk with other photographers, like what is that specific thing that you want to share with the world that is going to help others? Or maybe you're a photographer and you want to be on a podcast about, like, I don't know, motherhood, and you want to go and talk about whatever comes, tied to that, or parenthood, I should say, to be inclusive, comes tied, around that. So I think that just, once again, trying to be a guest on an episode without a goal or like a specific point of view, you're gonna get a lot of no reply emails. Because again, what I said at the beginning, if you send me an email, hey, I just want to be on your podcast because I've heard that it's lovely and I would like to talk about photography, I'm not even gonna bother to reply. Like, I'm gonna ghost you forever and eternity. That's just what's gonna happen.
And if you do get in and you really don't have anything to say, let's say you got like accepted, especially someone that's maybe like newer starting podcast, you're like, I love your work, I definitely would love to have you, because they maybe have a big following, you have gorgeous work, but like, I don't care what you have to say, just come and be on my podcast. And if you're that person, you show up, I can tell you, if you have nothing to say, you're not going to love yourself after. It's not a good feeling, right?
Yeah, you might even close some doors, right? Because you might go on this podcast without really like a clear point of view, and somebody that is listening could be like, yeah, this is never going to happen on my podcast. So now when you have maybe something to say, people are going to be like, oh, but I heard you once and it wasn't that great. So you don't need to do it. We don't need to do everything. I don't need to do a dancing TikTok. That's not for me.
Yeah. Oh, okay, I tried to do a dancing reel with my pregnant belly, and it was the most awkward thing. I felt like, oh, it was not good. It went out into the world, and it was no bueno.
It's not for me, and we all need to be self-aware enough to be like, it's not for me. I have to let it go. It was a nice dream, but it's not for me.
It's not for me. So let's see what she says here. She says, I don't think people really want to know what I have to say, but yes, this makes sense.
Cool.
Oh, I think
I wouldn't minimize what it is that you have to offer at any stage in your career, because I've interviewed photographers that are very early and they still have something to offer.
Yes.
And again, the goal isn't to offer some earth-shattering information that nobody has heard before. It's interesting how sometimes when we hear something from one person that it hits for us personally, where we're at in life or in business in that moment, coming from that person, the tone of voice, their life experience, they somehow feel more relevant to us, whatever it is. So it just so happens that that individual who may have only shot for 6 months has something to offer.
Yes.
And so I don't think we should minimize what it is that we have to offer, even with a little bit of experience. The key though, and I know, Stacey, you asked this in advance, and we've kind of alluded to a little bit. If you're going to go on a podcast, make sure that you're very specific about the value that you would like to bring to that audience. That is the number one thing. Because I honestly, to Carolina's earlier point, I'm so tired as well of getting these just kind of templated pitches. And it's usually, and of course, as our podcast has aged and grown, more and more people want to come on to share about a service or a product that they're offering. And that's what they lead with. Or if they don't, it feels very fake initially. And then you get the pitch and you're like, oh, now I see what it was.
Oh, that too. Don't tell me you have a beautiful class to sell. That's lovely. Yes.
Yeah.
No me importa. Gracias.
Yeah. Lead with value. Lead with value. And don't minimize the significance of what might seem like something basic or small, because it could be that what you have to share in the moment might happen to add value. Let the podcast host decide that, but just don't minimize that too much.
And don't feel like you have to be an extrovert. Like, I know sometimes I've worked with people before and they're like, whoa, Stacey, you're a lot. Like, I don't know, maybe like you're not for me. I'm like, that's totally true. Like, just because you can be like an outgoing, loud person doesn't mean like you're the type of person that people want to interview. As long as you bring good energy, it doesn't have to be in a loud way. Like, then you're winning. Like, don't feel like you have to be loud to be like a good interview.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Stacey, I am going to have to run.
Yeah.
I hate to bow out, but it's been really cool to be a part of this. Thank you for inviting me on.
I would love to have you guys back for round 2, because I feel like just scratch the surface. Maybe if we wait until after November, I could also enjoy a beverage with you guys. That would
Let's do it. That'd be fun. We can have a midday tequila shot or something.
Oh, I'm not drinking for a year, and you guys will have to go on without me.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful day. It's
you
great
so much,
to chat with you just a little bit, Daniel.
Yeah, so lovely. You guys are fantastic.
All right, we'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Gonna hit